I did want to talk to you about Galileo's letter to the Grand Duchess of Christina of Tuscany, because I feel like that's the heart of your book. And Galileo argues for the divide between the book of nature, science, and the book of scripture. And like Augustine, he cautions there should be careful interpretation, and so they use the example of Job 38:4 and foundations of the earth. And what I wondered was why Galileo or Augustine should be thought of as knowing really any more about what should be considered to be, when it comes down to it, the heart of it, allegorical and non-allegorical within a book, within the Bible.
Yeah. I've got enormous respect for the early church fathers. I mean, they had the stories of the early Christian times delivered to them, and they had to kind of make sense out of it. And Augustine, I think, is absolutely fantastic. The things that he thought of in early times. So he's somebody I would take very seriously. Galileo was in a funny position because he was really in danger of his own life because he was so obstreperous. And he had these understandings with the church about what it was reasonable to do and what it was unreasonable. If he'd stuck to those, his life would have been much easier, the church's life would have been much easier, and I think they could have got through this period with much less disruption. But anyway, because Galileo was Galileo, he was pretty disruptive. As a result of this, he got himself into all sorts of strife, not just with the church hierarchy, but also with people who were a bit lower down, church people who were a bit lower down. And I think his letter to the Duchess was it was partly to protect his own skin. He was trying to get some of these things off his chest, how unreasonable he thought the church hierarchy were being in their views about the interpretation of Scripture. And that's really mainly what the letter's about. It's very, you would have seen it's pretty repetitive.
They saw it as defending their ground, didn't they? I mean, they were happy, as far as I can tell, with the Copernican theory as a theory, but they saw it as a threat to their own authority.
Yep. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it was. And it wasn't really a battle between science and religion. It was a battle between science and the power of the church. I don't think it had too much to do with what the church was believing, but they really did treasure their power to be the sort of source of knowledge for the people. And they were very defensive about translations of the Bible. And I think they could see perfectly well what was coming if sort of analytic science got too much power. And so they were perfectly happy to use Copernicus's theory for structuring their calendar. But they just didn't want to have it as more than a theory, as actual fact out there. And I don't know whether Galileo got this or whether he was really looking too much at his own situation of his personal science not being accepted, but I don't think it was for scientific reasons. It was for these power reasons. Yeah, I mean, that went on then for quite a while. But I think we'll probably say this in the book somewhere, that if Galileo had just played a little bit cooler and hadn't pushed them quite so hard, an awful lot of this tension that arose in Galilean and post-Galilean times too. I mean, this went on. I think a lot of that could have been, at least at some level, could have been sidestepped. And the whole tension between science and religion might have been put off. I mean, it came back in a big way in the 19th century. That might have happened anyway, but I think the whole Galilean episode could have easily been avoided if Galileo had been a little bit more compromising, and it wouldn't have cost him anything. I mean, it didn't cost Copernicus anything. The Copernican view worked reasonably well. I mean, it had predictive power. That's why the church was using it for their calendar, because it worked. Yeah.
But that seems like from their perspective it would have undermined the idea of the way that the universe is structured, to move it from the Aristotle idea to the Copernican.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
So they saw it as a threat in that respect, that it undermined Scripture, and that was essentially the heart.
Yeah, but I think the thing it was undermining was the church's role as the sort of fount of all knowledge. They seemed to be able to cope with using Copernican theory as something for their own use.
It wouldn't be widely distributed amongst people, and so that seems like the threat, that if people get a different idea and then they go, well, we're not going to believe what they say, then that's that's the threat.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so.
And also, I was interested in this, and I feel like this is an article of faith as well, because I haven't really found anyone that could really explain this to me, and we might be just talking about this as a talking point, essentially. Yeah. But the decision, whether we're talking about early church fathers, and was it Augustine warning about, conflating scientific ideas with scriptural ideas and the danger of that? but the idea of what is allegorical in the Bible and what is like talking about an event, a factual event. If we say the creation story is allegorical or Jonah and the whale is allegorical, then we could also say that the resurrection is allegorical. That makes sense. And so it has to be an article of faith, that there's a distinction between these things.
I think perhaps the difference between the sort of creation story and the resurrection story is that the resurrection story is much closer to the present time, and a lot more people saw it and it was documented. Whereas I think with the creation story, there's it's a sort of difficult thing. I have a colleague here who's very interested in this creation story thing, and he's a clergyman himself, but he has friends, young Earth creationists, and he's trying to persuade them of the error of their ways. And he's been reading a lot of stuff about what's people's views, Old Testament scholarship on the creation. And he's sort of reading things that regard the creation story as sort of cultural things. It was written to the people of that time. Now, it's a pretty good story, and it's got a lot of elements, that are pretty close to being truth, physical truths, if you interpret them with a latitude. But I think they are things that were written for their time. I think Augustine sort of looked at the things perhaps in a somewhat similar way. He had this thing that I think we cite in the book that, if there's something in the Bible that disagrees with your immediate experience, then you better try and reinterpret what you're reading in the Bible. And I think Galileo used that as part of his gripe against the church.
Yeah, so I suppose what we've been talking about is faith.
Yeah.
Across all levels of life.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think situations are amenable to faith, that are just not amenable to the scientific method. I mean, that would be my take on it.
I guess my takeaway from reading your book was, both for you and your co-author, David Block, was that the richness that faith gives you in your life. Yeah, there's certainly no doubt about that. Yeah. There's a surprising number of Christian scholars out there. Yeah, well, Chris Mulheron has sent me a book that he's written with all of the very, very prominent scientists such as yourself, There's a whole bunch of them who don't sort of really come out. I mean, they're there, and you just sort of run into them, often in unexpected situations. I mean, there's people I've worked with really almost all my life who are very serious Christians, but it never comes up at all. No, that's fine. That's their choice. But there's many more of them than I thought.